It's been a winter like no other, seemingly endless snow, and while most of us wanted to melt and go away, there is a good chance that we could be preparing for flooding in some form this spring. So local Northern Tool and Equipment Senior Regional Director Steve Spears explains how to avoid some of that mayhem later on. Steve, thank you for joining us. What can homeowners do now to prevent water damage from spring flooding?
Yeah, there are a few things. Thanks, Sam, for the question. So there are a few things folks can do to avoid flooding in their basements. First and foremost is to remove as much of the snow as they can, both from their roofs and their gutters, and a little bit away from the home so it doesn't pool around the foundation of the home. It's also critical to make sure that the sump pump is fully operational. That is a critical component to making sure we stay dry in the home whenever we have any potential flooding.
And when talking about the sump pumps, is there anything obvious or noticeable to see, hey, this isn't working the way it should be, or something that you can see ahead of time before you need it in a dire situation?
Yeah, great question. It's critical to test the sump pump once a year at the very least, especially going into spring, because it is the time of year where we do see melt every year, and it's critical to make sure that piece of equipment is operational. There are a few things homeowners can do. One is to open up the sump. There's a lid on that sump bucket and make sure that there's no debris around the pump. The making sure that the float switch is operational. That's the piece that turns the pump on, and making sure that there's nothing in the way of that working, and then filling the bucket up actually with water to test it and make sure that there are no challenges on the line heading out to the outside, to make sure that the water doesn't stay inside, it gets outside the building.
And in terms of more preventative care, is there anything else that people should be aware of that can get to that preventative step before we start thinking about the potential damage that could ensue from flooding?
Yeah, there are parts that can be replaced. Like I mentioned, the float switch, that's an important component to the sump pump. Again, if it doesn't turn on, it could be a problem with the pump itself. And we sell several different types of sump pumps that can make sure that that product is always working. And then, like I mentioned, the line that goes out to the outside, making sure that there's no cracks in any of the pipes or in the hoses. Again, all those are critical to make sure that they're fully operational.
And worst case, should homeowners happen to deal with flood damage by chance, what should they think about doing, and what should be their first step when dealing with possible flood damage?
Absolutely. And unfortunately, we do everything we can to avoid a flood, but there are times where it happens. And when it does, it's critical to get the area as dry as possible quickly. So utilizing shop vacs if it's into the rugs, utilizing water pumps or sump pumps to move the water outside of the building. And then lastly, getting that area as dry as possible. So once all the standing water is removed, it's critical to get the area as dry as we can. So using floor fans to dry the area, dehumidifiers work extremely well for taking the moisture out of the air. All those steps and all that equipment can be purchased at our stores at Northern Tool and Equipment. But it's also important to make sure that that area stays dry to avoid any mold that can grow in that space.
And at what point might this be a little bit too much for people? Might have bit off more than they can chew? At what point do they seek out professional help?
Absolutely. And we have pros both on the sales floor at our stores to help with any challenges that customers are seeing, as well as in our parts service and repair area. So if any of that equipment's not operating as it should, we can do those repairs right on site. And again, most of these floods can be handled themselves, but if the customer doesn't feel comfortable doing that, they can always reach out to a pro to come in and clean the space and get it dry and get back to normal once again.
Steve, thank you again for speaking with us
Yeah,
today.
thank you.
We'll be right back after this.